We're back with another episode of Uncontested Investing. I'm your host, Nate Zielinski, joined by my co-host, Suzanne and I, and we're going to continue to put the fun in funding with,
Absolutely.
with our financing and funding series. Today, we're going to talk about partnering with other investors. I think it's a really important topic for investors to understand. A lot of times, people go into this industry with the notion that they have to do everything by themselves. They can't share leads. They need to get every property and deal for themselves in order to be successful, but that is far from the case. So let's talk about partnerships today, Suzanne.
Sure. There's a lot of ways to do that. Leveraging resources is a key component to making yourself successful. And that, brings you, it connects you with some of the folks in your, I'll say, business center, whether it's a county, wherever you're, sourcing those assets from. And I think if you can work with someone either who's got a couple years on you that's willing to kind of take you under their wing, but, show you how to do some things, but also, work together. But there's a huge piece of that is you've got to have like-minded strategies. Without that, there could be some problems.
Yeah. And I like talking about this topic because it works both for new investors and experienced investors as well. So it affects every investor out there. As you mentioned, you can leverage the resources. They may have different skill sets or different knowledge base than you, right? So combining those and kind of turning it into a super investor, I think should be looked at as a positive, right? That's what we want to get across today, that partnering with other investors is a way to establish yourself in the industry and fast track success.
Well, and hopefully you each bring something unique to the table.
Yeah.
You could have someone who's, pretty good at plumbing and electric and someone else who's good at roofing and framing or whatever that is, or, landscaping or, business strategy, business plans. But you want to have it so it feels like it's an equitable distribution of responsibility.
Yeah.
And that's probably a key piece to making sure that it works.
Yep. I think it's an important disclaimer that this conversation is not going to be all about money, but we have to start with one of the benefits of having a partnership is the access to more capital, right? Deals become more accessible. You can become more competitive in different markets. Maybe the person you partner with is experienced in this state and you're experienced in the state or the town that's local to you. So you can kind of expand with a partner, go after more deals. And then again, that capital is just that security blanket, right? You both are invested in this and you guys can go after more than just your small single family, very starter home for investors, if you will, right? You might be able to start with that duplex or the 4 unit. You can go after those multifamilies and just achieve success quicker that way with deeper pockets.
Well, and you're kind of jumping off the cliff together in a good way, but you're also sharing the risk.
Yep.
So it's and with that, you want to make sure that as you develop this partnership, the legal boundaries are established well in advance before you even, attempt that first asset acquisition. And, knowing the boundaries, knowing what the expectations are, but also having an exit strategy in place too. We kind of touched on that earlier.
Yep.
And making sure that if you're looking to I don't say terminate in a bad way, but as maybe someone's done with where they want to be in this
Yep.
in this relationship. Do you have a plan to buy them out? How do you manage that transition? Because if that needs to be really established up front.
Yeah. No, I think it's important because you bring up a really good point that you don't just have to have one partner, right? You can have multiple partners. Say you have somebody that's really honed in on fix and flip and they're your go-to and you guys tackle that part of the industry together. Maybe somebody loves doing ground up construction. You can partner with a different individual to accomplish those goals. So keeping an open mind and having multiple partnerships is by no means the wrong way to go about it. And circling back to risk mitigation, I think some investors can always have that analysis by paralysis by analysis, excuse me, mixing up my analogy there, or they can just stay on the sidelines for too long. They're afraid to make a decision. So having that partner is somebody that can motivate you, bring you along, maybe show you the pros of why you guys should be doing this specific deal. So all things to consider, and you hit on it perfectly with the complementary skill set. Try to avoid finding somebody that's exactly the same as you as an investor. Shared goals and an end game are important, but if they're good at the same things you're good at, you're leaving some room on the table for accomplishing your goals, achieving more. So find somebody that's a little bit different than you in terms of the professional skill set that they bring to the industry.
But you said something well, Nate, that where if you've got a fix and flip partnership and now it's ready to transition the asset. Well, maybe you want to hold on to it and you've got another partner who wants to
Yes.
come in
Yep.
and buy out your first one and do a buy and hold. So transitioning from fix and flip on one partner to a buy and hold with another. And it makes sense. It's you find the partnership that works,
Mhm.
and then find the one that transitions well.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that's just an important strategy because you want to avoid getting in a position where you feel like you have to force something, right? If you have a successful partnership with somebody that's doing the fix and flips, don't always be pushing at them and say, we should really hold on to this. We should really hold on to this. We should rent this out. It should become a 30-year rental. If that's uncomfortable for them, just leave it at that, continue the successful partnership, and then find the partner, as we've both been mentioning, that'll work with you on the long-term side of things.
But there's a piece that ties to that as well. Once the equitable engagement, but also is the equitable
Hmm.
responsibilities, making sure that you're not the one who's doing the lion's share of work.
Yeah,
And if it is, how do you manage that?
yeah,
Those are the tough elements that you have to address, and how do you go
yeah.
down that path?
Yeah. Yeah, not everything, as we're discussing today, is going to be completed easily when you're talking about working with a partner, but over time, the benefits outweigh some of those initial struggles that you may have with finding and securing a partner. I think the last benefit worth touching on is networking, one of our favorite topics on the show, but specific partners can introduce you to new contacts
Sure.
that maybe can be other partners, maybe introduce you to a general contractor that you end up using for your individual fix and flips that you may have. So having that networking capability and having another person that may be able to do the networking for you can be a huge win, right? They can introduce you to new contacts, new deals, and new markets to operate in. So all those things are important to consider when you're talking about finding the right partner or partners.
Well, equally important to that is also steering away from those that have not done right by
Yes.
you
Hmm.
either. And even, and we just the previous example, if you got a fix and flip partner that wants to exit that,
Yeah.
but you want to find someone who maybe has a good property management partner.
Mm.
And so
Yep.
there's pieces to the, figure your puzzle out,
Yep.
and you can build it in advance of the whole strategy.
Yeah, there's some trial and error to it for sure. It seems a little bit scary, but it's worth putting in that work to secure the right partner.
For sure.
I think talking about types of partnerships is also important, right? There's so much more than just finding a similar like-minded investor and then splitting profits or splitting a property 50-50, right? So you have those equity-based partnerships. You also have a joint venture, which can be one-off projects. So if you're looking to expand into ground-up construction and you've never done it before, find a partner that's maybe willing to help, see how it goes, see if that's something that you want to pursue down the road. But for the time being, that joint venture on one project can be perfect for any investor.
Well, and a joint venture doesn't mean that someone's going to roll up their sleeves at the same rate you
Hmm.
are. They may be just your funding
Yeah.
JV partner. You
Yeah.
may be the one who's doing the minutia to complete the
Hmm.
asset, and but you knew in advance of that they were just giving you the revenues to
Yep.
make it successful.
Yep. And I think that segues into a discussion about silent versus active partners, right? Sometimes they'll do a lot of money and a little work. Sometimes they'll do all the money and no work. So sometimes you might be even yourself contributing all the money to a younger investor and they'll do all the work for you. So setting those roles before, knowing, as you mentioned, right, the legal agreements, the conversations beforehand, having those set in stone before you get into a project is very important. So everybody knows their role and know what they have to complete going into an investment.
It's true. I mean that's it's those are conversations that you have to have painful after the fact
Mhm.
versus planning for them in
Yeah.
front will yield to very different
Yep,
outcomes.
yep. And I think the last type of partnership worth discussing for our audience would be syndication. So, investors that want to make that jump from, as we talked about, the single family homes, the duplexes, maybe the 4 or 5 units. If you're looking to get stake in a 50-unit apartment building in a major city, syndications might be the perfect partnership for you. So that's a large group of people trying to secure larger properties. And again, it goes back to risk mitigation. You probably have to put in a little bit less beforehand, but you can really reap the rewards over a long period of time if you find the right syndication to partner with.
And there's a lot of benefits to venturing down that path where you go from, scattered sites to a multifamily project. And I think it's important to, because you all of a sudden you've got the property management in one location. You have the roofer who's going to do the one location. So it's all a focused partnership
Hmm.
with various pieces all in one neighborhood. You're not driving miles and miles and miles between
Yeah,
these assets. You're all really connected, and
yeah.
it's a very cost-effective way. If you can manage that, it's a good way to expand your portfolio.
All right, so we're talking about partnering with other investors. Suzanne and I are going to take our first break of the episode here, though. We'll be right back with ways to find the right partner for you. RCN Capital offers flexible loan programs designed to help wholesale partners close their clients' deals faster. From fix and flip properties to long term rentals, new construction, and multifamily investments, we provide your clients with the funding solutions they need. With competitive terms and a quick approval process, we make it easy to focus on growing your business while we handle the financing. Learn more or apply today. Click the link in our bio or email info@rcncapital.com. Let RCN Capital help take your wholesale deals to the next level. Welcome back to this week's episode of the Financing and Funding series. We're going to continue our conversation about partnering with other investors to fast track your success in the industry. We left off at finding the right partner, Suzanne. So, as I mentioned previously, it's not always all about the money. If you're going to have a partner for the long term in this industry, there are a few things that you guys need to align on to ensure success. The first one being aligned values, right? Values and goals in this industry. What do we want to accomplish and how do we want to go about doing it? I think are two very important conversations to have right off the bat with a partner.
Absolutely. You want to make sure that if you're planning on working 6 days a week, so are they.
Yep.
And making sure that you agree on, I'll say the level of renovation. Are you going granite? Are you going quartz? Are you going Formica? So yeah, those are the things that if you don't agree on that, those are hurdles that are going to make it a really long and tedious project.
Yeah, I think risk tolerance is another one, right? How aggressive are you really willing to be to pursue a property? How close to that red line are you willing to get? If you have somebody that's an exact opposite personality and is very conservative or very aggressive, maybe that's not the right fit for you, and you have to kind of align with the person that's willing to take the same amount of risk. The last thing you want to do is get involved with somebody that could jeopardize all the hard work that you've put into everything, and then you wake up one day and your portfolio has gone sideways and you're back to square one, or even worse, you're completely out of the industry altogether. So,
well, you don't want to have to talk your partner
yeah,
into your mindset.
exactly.
You should it's or say we really need to do this, and well, that's a little too much of my. Well, I really want to do this. You can't. You have to really come to terms, and no one should be pushing the other person beyond their comfort level, because then when it fails, not if, when it fails, then the blame's going to be shifted.
Yeah. And I think that goes hand in hand with building trust. So you can do that prior to the partnership or right after you start the partnership, right? So through personal experiences,
Sure.
Personal relationships, right? So have those bonding moments with your partner. Like going that extra mile does matter. Whether it's just going to a bar and getting a glass of wine or a beer, or taking a trip together, playing a round of golf, whatever the case may be, you really want to build trust with the person that you're getting into business with. And it needs to happen very early on in the process. I know you can do a lot of vetting beforehand, or after you agree to partner with somebody, say, hey, let's take a trip and, have that bonding experience. And then that's where you can have those conversations about the risk tolerance, values, goals, and you really get that sense of like, okay, is this someone that I can see myself expanding in this career with or this industry with, or is this going to be a shorter term one where maybe we do one or two deals and then we part ways?
Well, and have the conversation. Say, hey, Nate, I'm going to ask you a couple questions. What do you think you excel at?
Yeah.
And what do you think that you need
Yep.
assistance on? And that's not a ding.
Mhm.
It's understanding, what are their benefits that they can bring to the table, and what in turn do I have that may be different than what you have?
No, I think considering skills is a huge part of it, right? As we talked about, don't find somebody that's similar to you. Find somebody that can complement you. And there's a very professional way to go about it, right? If somebody that is offended as you broaching this conversation, if they're offended and taken aback, maybe that's not the right person.
Partner.
Exactly, exactly. If they're going to be sensitive about that, just
that's not a difficult conversation.
Yes.
There's going to be many harder ones that you're going to have down the road.
Yep. And then, all these partnerships, they're going to be key indicators or elements for success, right? Things that you want to be looking out for. Is the communication clear? I think is the first one. So we talked about these conversations. Use different examples or scenarios as an investor to maybe test your partner, right? Are they going to communicate clearly? Are they going to respond well to pressure? There's a lot of different variables that you can put a potential partner through to make sure that they're the right fit for you.
And so and are they organized? And who should be the one doing the financials?
Yeah.
Who should be the one? And that's a huge trust factor. Someone who's going to balance the books. Are they balancing it, or are they skimming? So you need to find out the things that you can give yourself confidence and trust in them, but also in the strategy.
And I think you mentioned it, and it's so important to come back to, but legal agreements are a must when you're talking about these partnerships, right? Don't wait for something to go wrong before you decide what you're going to do, how you're going to split everything up. It may be a tough or annoying conversation to have at the beginning of the partnership, but it'll put everybody's mind at ease. It'll set boundaries, and everybody will know what's expected of them going into it. So if you have that legal agreement, you shouldn't have to worry about anything if something goes wrong because a plan is already in place.
Absolutely. And, like on a fix and flip, what's the rate you're buying them out at?
Hmm.
How do you just establish what that
Yeah.
the transition price is? And then on the partner that's coming in, what are they buying in at? Is it 50/50? And so those are key pieces on how that's going to be managed, but also I think the biggest piece is who's really, some of them are, who's really what are the duties?
Yeah.
You don't want to
Yeah.
feel like I feel like I'm doing 70% of
Hmm.
the work here.
Hmm.
This is just, it's not a good feeling, and you want to
Yep.
figure that out in advance. Now, if it's part of the agreement was you're going to do all the work and I'm going to fund it, well,
Yeah.
then you're going to do all the
Yep.
work.
Yeah. Yeah, some of it is looking in the mirror as an investor and saying, even if you're unhappy with the partnership, what did you agree to on the onset? And are you holding up your end of the bargain before you get frustrated with your partner and wonder if they're doing what they're supposed to be doing?
And probably, plan for verbal reviews.
Hmm.
We sit down and say, I don't care how busy we are, but every 6 weeks at
Yeah.
10 o'clock, we're going to have a meeting.
Yep.
And know that it's coming. And as you lead up to that, have your little scratch pad, the things that you want to review. And if it's something important enough, don't wait the 6 weeks.
Yeah.
But certainly have a set schedule to communicate.
That's a huge part of growth too, right? So not only for you as the investor personally, but for your partnership. Are they willing to have those check-in meetings with you? What are you guys going to discuss during those meetings? What does the overall health of the partnership look like? And what are the next steps? What do we want to do in the next 6 weeks? So when we come back for another meeting, everything is on track and these meetings stay positive and reflecting on what's possible rather than in the past 6 weeks this went wrong and we need to fix it, right? So trying to stay on that positive trajectory with those check-in meetings, I think is really important.
And if you hit a hurdle, don't hide it.
Hmm.
And because it's that's not going to help. And say, hey, I can't get this done. Who do you know? What do you think? What should we do next?
Yeah,
Because I think it's don't blindside your partner
exactly.
because it's not going to go well.
Yeah, and there are some challenges or red flags in all of these discussions, right? Every partner may have its drawbacks, but you really want to be able to look out for these challenges, find them as early as possible, and see if you can come to a resolution. Disagreement on a vision of a property is a big one, right? Setting those expectations, as we've talked about. Are they sticking to the plan? Are they wavering? If so, is there a concession in mind? I think some of the most successful partnerships, it's easy to make a correlation from a partnership to a marriage, right? But it's negotiating, conceding. Is this something that's going to be a big deal breaker for you, or is it something small that you can see yourself getting past? I think having an argument over every little thing when you're in this partnership, it can have it become very tense, and you want to part ways. But if you're willing to concede and say, okay, you can have this disagreement, right? I don't necessarily agree, but it's something small. Let's have you win this argument and move on. Something like that is extremely important, I
Well,
think.
and yes, and I think it's important that you have the ability to concede and
Yeah.
say, this isn't worth risking that, this whole thing. But the flip side is the reason why you've gotten into this partnership is to really expand your portfolio or go from a scattered site to a 50-unit multifamily.
Yep.
And that's your end goal. So make sure you always keep that on
Yeah.
track and you find a way to, is
Yep.
to keep it as positive as possible. And it is like a marriage. No, it's not every marriage is perfect. But they're always worth working for.
Yes, yes. And we've talked about the unequal contributions as well. So if you're going to approach a partner and say, you're not holding up your end of the bargain, make sure that you're coming with proof, right? Hopefully there's a legal agreement in place, or there's been a handshake agreement about who's doing what, who's supplying the money, who's putting in the work, how we're going to divvy up responsibilities. If you're going to call out a partner, make sure you come with proof. Okay, not so that makes the conversation much easier. There won't be any counter argument if you have that proof in mind. And I think it's always important to communicate. Always keep that open line of communication. Don't let something fester. Don't let these small things bother you, annoy you, because then over time that boils over, and now these small problems become a massive problem that's probably insurmountable. But if you're always talking and working through issues, the little things get solved and you can keep moving forward.
And that's important. And it's communication. I know we touched on this maybe a year ago about communication, and the risk management side of it. And I think it's important that you, that's the only, I shouldn't say the only way, but it's one of the key ways that any partnership will be successful, small or large.
Yeah.
And that's,
Yep.
it's just, it'll get you past, address it in the moment.
Yes. Yep.
Don't let it fester.
I think that's important. And then it kind of goes with transparency, right? A red flag for a potential partner of yours. Are they being transparent? When you call them and get an update on the property, are they kind of dodging certain questions? Are they being very vague? These can be red flags that over time it would be worth to, probably cease having that partnership if these behaviors continue. Are they following through with what they say they're going to be doing? If they have a deadline on a fix and flip, are they missing that by days, weeks, months even? So always keep that in mind as an investor. Are they being transparent with you? And is this actually an equal partnership? Because without transparency, it's not really a partnership anymore.
And make sure that that piece of the relationship is also addressed. We have the exit strategy, what we presume we've made it to the end of the project.
Mm-hmm.
But what happens if you can't get there?
Yep.
What is the midstream
Yep.
decision that you have to make? While it's difficult, do you have something in place that allows the disbursement of the asset in a different way than it was initially intended?
Yep. And I think the last red flag worth covering, the main goal of these partnerships, right, is to make your life easier, to make more money, to expand in the business. If you find your partner is overcomplicating things, getting discouraged easily, any small thing like that, again, that's something that can be a red flag and be worth terminating the partnership. This is supposed to make your life easier, not harder. So if you find your partner doing that, maybe go a different direction.
And maybe find a secondary partner to buy out the first.
Yep.
Yep. There's ways to do that. Just if it's not, you'd rather find a resolution than walk away.
Yep.
Because walking away is going to cost a lot more.
Yeah, that contingency plan is important, right? And you don't have to share everything with your partner, right? So maybe as an investor, you can devise a plan throughout the course of any partnership, right? It doesn't have to be specific to just one, but if this partnership goes sideways, how do I want to approach the subject of getting out of it and moving on, right? So that backup plan, that contingency plan is important to have in place.
It's like a prenup.
There you go. Yeah. Beautiful. So there you go. There's the Crash Course 101 on partnering with an investor. For Suzanne Andreessen, I'm Nate Zielinski. We're signing off, and we'll see you in the next episode of Financing and Funding.
See you next time.
Thank you for listening to Uncontested Investing. Questions about today's episode or the podcast? Email podcast@rcncapital.com and make sure to follow REI Inc. magazine on LinkedIn and Facebook, and RCN Capital on Instagram, LinkedIn, and Facebook. See you all next time.